Hey again everyone, and welcome back to another cosmere review and discussion video. Today I am of course talking about part 1 of Rhythm of War, and when I say part 1 I actually mean part 1 and 2, including the interludes and the prologue. As always, I'm going to split this book down the middle and have sort of two separate parts to the discussion, with the first part containing everything in parts 1 and 2, and then the second half of the video. Or possibly a separate video if I have trouble exporting a big one again like I did last time. It had to be uploaded as two separate videos last time because it was too long, but we'll see how that goes. It'll either be two halves of a video or part 2 coming soon. Regardless, I'm going to jump into Rhythm of War, and I think the first thing that I have to mention is that there's been a time jump between the end of the last book and the start of this one. A year has passed. So exactly what happened in that year, we don't find out exactly straight away, but it's sort of drip fed to us through the opening part of the book, really. I'm gonna cover all the stuff that we've learned that happened in the year off, and then I'm going to go into this book's stories. It's kind of weird how it's structured, but bear with me and we'll get through this. One thing that I'm not particularly sure on, that I think we will probably learn more on due to the amount it's been mentioned, is an expedition to Aemia that they went on at some point in this year. There was an expedition to Aemia and they found like a cache of soulcasters or something, and yeah, don't know a great deal about that. It seems to be something that was successful, at least they think, but I imagine it's come back just because it's been mentioned like 60 times, the name Aemia, and yeah, we haven't been told much about it, so that's something to look out for. Other than that, Kaladin started dating Lynn. Apparently they broke up. Okay, I guess. And there's sort of been a protracted war over basically all the human lands, everybody who's in the coalition, and the Singer/Fuse tribes being run by Odium. They've been fighting over the past year, having these small skirmishes and getting into it with each other, but no real progress being made on either side. It's sort of just a stalled battlefront with people dying over and over again. The Parshendi are of newly awakened, so they're not well trained, and the humans have that advantage at the minute, but the Fused have the advantage that if they die, they can just take over a new Singer body and come back again. Whereas the Radiants can't do that. If they die, then new Radiants have to be trained, assuming the Spren that was bonded to them is ready or happy, willing to take on a new Radiant. And speaking of which, there's been a huge expansion in the amount of Radiants at Uruthuru and part of the Coalition. I think there's like 300 Windrunners now, counting Scribes, and Shalana has like 20 Lightweavers in what she calls the Unseen Court, which is like, come on, that's a cringy name. Come on, Brandon. The Unseen Court. Come on, Sharon. The Unseen Court. Come on, any of the editors that had input in this. The Unseen Court. That was the best you could do. Snowbridge 4, is it? Anyway, the Edge Dancers as well have expanded massively under, I believe, like, Lift is sort of their head, despite being a teenage girl who refuses to grow up and continually annoys me. The Windrunners, however, have been stopped from expanding because the Honor Spren won't take any more Radiants on. Or more, they can't find any Honor Spren willing to bond a Radiant anymore. They've used all the ones that they've bonded, like every Honor Spren that would agree to it, and then the rest are like, nope. We don't want anything to do with you. Piss off. We're staying in Shadesmar. On the other side of the war, we have the Singers and the Fused, who are like fully set up in Kolinar now. They're using that as a base of operations. And they have their 9 sort of sage counselors, the 9, that are now stationed in Kolinar. And when I say stationed in Kolinar, I mean actually, like, frozen there in part of a rock. There's a lot of weird world building in this, and I guess it's to make up for the fact that the chulls and the flora and fauna and everything are less weird to us now, so Brandon still wants weird stuff happening. And I have to say, like, I see a bit of a comparison between the Fused and the Seanchan, but I'll probably get into more on that a bit later. There's also wars going on, like, the Alethi borders, as they're trying to get some sort of foothold because they do want to take back Kolinar. And there's wars going on in Azir, where the Azish are pressed between Odium's armies on one side, and I think he's called Tezim, the God Priest, one of the heralds who has raised, I think, the Tukari. I might be butchering all sorts here. But basically, Azir is between those two forces and struggling. Veden is holding, but there's a threat of Taravangian there. Nobody really trusts him anymore, rightly so, after discovering what he did with Seth. They don't know the full depth of his plans, but they know that there's a chance he may be working with Odium, and of course we know that he is working with Odium and planning to betray everyone. Other than that, there is Herdaz, which we don't actually go to, but we hear of an extended war there, where they've like somehow survived every battle, even though it's looked like overwhelming odds. And there's this general called the Mink who just keeps getting people to win, and we've seen him briefly as he was like trying to escape out of handcuffs. He's got like a Houdini thing going on, but he turns up more in this book, and he's a cool character. He's Rodel Iterald in my head, so that's like my headcanon for the Mink is Rodel Iterald. Aside from that, Shallan and Adlin are just sort of doing their thing politically, and Navani has been working hard, but I'll say more about that once we get into the next little bit. And in fact, I'll move on to Shallan and Adlin and what they've been doing now, because they've been infiltrating the Sons of Honor, which is the remnant of Sadeas and Amaram's sort of group of people that were trying to bring back the Heralds and the Radiants as a result, and cause a desolation at the same time, because they're basically all just dumb as fuck. And we get to see Shallan going on a mission to try and identify that Eli Sadeas is still the leader, and she does, and then Eli basically tells her that she's been played by Mraize, which we've kind of known all along. At least I've thought all along that he's just getting her to do what he wants and tricking her into thinking it's her motive as well. He's been drawing her along the carrot on a string like the entire books, and I'm not a big fan of Shallan's character. I'm actually just going to take a minute to say this. I do not like Shallan. I can't stand by being in her head. And this might be really insensitive, so I don't mean any offense to anyone, because maybe there's people who read Kaladin and they don't empathize with them in the way that I do as someone who suffers from depression. I can't empathize with Shallan because I have no idea how that feels. And I just really struggle to connect with it because it's scary and, like, dangerous. I don't know. I feel like my problem isn't the fact that she has a mental illness. It's that she has a mental illness that she doesn't accept. I think that's the problem. And if you don't accept it, then it will ruin you. Kaladin is becoming to accept his mental illness, so is Teft in a way even. But until you can acknowledge that you've got a problem, it's only going to get worse, and we've just seen that happening over and over again with Shallan, and I find it really tough to root for her. I struggle when I'm inside her head. Regardless, she gets to Eli, and she tells Shallan that Mraize is basically playing her, and there's a couple of mentions of other star systems, but Eli gets killed. They try to arrest her, but then somebody killed her instead, which indicates to them that there's a spy on their team, And Shallan asks Mraize about it, and he says that he's interested in light weavers, let's just say that. Which is like pointing her in whatever direction he wants her to look, which immediately made me thought, okay, it's not one of the light weavers. It's like, it'll be one of Adeline's boys or something, you know, maybe Felt or whatever. Not that I have anything against Felt, he seems like a chill guy. It's just a random name I remembered from Adeline's men. Anyway, Mraize, after the Illai murder, tells Shallan that he wants her to go to the capital city of the Honor-Spren in Shadesmar. I can't remember the name of the city. And find a guy called Rastares who's living there that he wants to contact, I think. It's not entirely clear, but he's pointing her in a direction and says that he'll tell her everything she wants to know. All his knowledge will be hers if she does what he asks. So she asks to infiltrate the Honor-Spren capital. And he gives her this cube to contact him with. It says, contact me when you're in Shadesmar, you just speak to the cube. I'm going to call it a communication cube, I don't have another name for it. It reminds me a bit of the idiot cube, or the idiot box, Terangriel, that I think Samael gave to the Shider. And that sort of sets up their story for the rest of the book. And the other thing that's going on at the start, we get a point of view from Lirin, Cal's father, and I'm not a fan of Lirin. I've never liked this guy. He's so judgmental, he just wants Kaladin to be a copy of him. He's not a good father. I'm sorry, he's not. He might be a good surgeon. He might think that he's doing the right thing, but he is not a good father, and I can't stand him. And I was glad that it was only one chapter of him, because when I saw that he was in the part 1, like as one of the names of POV characters, I was like, what? Ew, no. And then when it opened on chapter 1, and I was like, Lirin? Please tell me this isn't a Lirin book. And it wasn't. Thankfully, it was like one chapter. But Lirin is essentially taking a bunch of refugees into Hearthstone. Kaladin's hometown is under fused control at the minute, and the fused aren't actually there very often. It's mainly just the regular singers that are sort of policing things, since it's such a small town. But they've got a lot of refugees flooding in from Herdaz. And yeah, Lirin's doing his thing being a surgeon. And at the start, he's also trying to smuggle in the Mink, who I mentioned a bit earlier. He has left Herdaz after finally losing, and smuggles himself into the Hearthstone camp. On the same day that the Mink arrives, a fused also arrives, and Lirin's having a panic because he's like, shit, is he after the Mink? But it turns out the fused was looking for Kaladin. They'd seen him in the area, and Kaladin turns up and starts fighting with the fused. They have a big fight, and he wins. And then this other fused comes after him, not one that's flying. So the flying ones that are like the Windrunners are called Heavenly ones. And at first he's fighting one of them, and I think he wins. He manages to kill him. I guess it's not kill him. You see, it is killing, but like not permanently. He wins the fight anyway. And then this other fuse comes after him that has a power we haven't seen yet. And he has this weird like ability to leave a husk behind, which melts subsequently, and turn into red lightning, and then like zip and teleport essentially, and come out at the new point. And Kaladin figures out through the fight with him that like he can only do it 3 times, and then he has to recharge his Void Light because he can't carry the Void Light with him for some reason, and I'm forgetting the exact details. Right, yeah, because he turns into lightning, literally, like he can't have possessions on him, so he can't carry anything. He can infuse himself with enough Void Light to do the thing 3 times, but then he has to go back somewhere to recharge. And this guy's like super aggressive. Kaladin starts flying away because he realizes this guy can't fly, and the guy, who later find out is called the Pursuer, zips up to him and just like grabs him out of the air and starts falling with Kaladin in his arms, like trying to stab him in the neck repeatedly. And Kaladin's actually in a lot of danger in this engagement, which is unusual because recently he's been fighting a lot with the Heavenly Ones, and they've sort of got this agreement thing going on where, like, they can challenge each other to one-to-one duels in the sky as a contest, and as long as they accept it in the same way by raising their spear, then the rest of the fuse will, like, swarm up on them. So the guys are taking advantage of this as best they can, and even some of the fused are willing to abandon a fight and be like, you won this one, off you go, or I won this one, but that's enough, you don't need to die for today. Because they have some sort of honour? Here's a thought, right? Leshwi's open to ideas, and we know this through Venli's point of view in this book, even though I haven't got to her yet. I'm just going off on a tangent, bear with me. The Skybreakers turned against humankind and side with the Odium side. Could some of the fused turn against the Odium side? If they had enough honour? If so, maybe the Heavenly Ones will join the coalition against Odium. That might be a hot take, I don't know. Pin that. Put a pin in that one. So yeah, the pursuer's going in on Kaladin anyway. He just keeps stabbing him in the neck repeatedly, trying to drain his Stormlight, essentially. And Kaladin's not doing well, but he manages to escape. He can go faster and further than the fused can, who can only do the 3-charge thing. And once Kaladin's lost the attention of the pursuer, the airship finally arrives. And this airship is what Navani's been working on. Going from her previous platform risey things that she was doing, she has spent all her time doing research to Fabrials and creating these conjoined devices and different mathematical equations and shit. She's created a flying ship with Fabrials, essentially. And it's not like a battleship that has attacks and stuff, it's a carrier. It's a transport device. So they fly into Hearthstone to pick up the entire town because Kaladin has arranged to bring Hearthstone to Urithuru, seeing as though his parents won't listen and come alone. He was like, alright, we'll bring the whole town. So they fly this ship from Urithuru to Hearthstone, which takes like weeks, but they pick up all the villagers who are now under pressure from these fused that have come in to respond to Kaladin being seen there. So the airship lands and brings with it a ton of more Windrunners, Dalinar, Navani, basically all the important people that would need to be there. And they start like loading refugees on. Edge dancers flow off the ship and immediately start healing people with their regrowth abilities. Then making sure people can get up and walk again and get onto the ship out of the potential way of the fused and the singers and the Stormform Regals that are attacking them. And we have a sequence where Dalinar once again opens his perpendicularity. We get a bit more clarification on just what this means and how it affects the other people around him. And it basically means that everyone around him in a certain radius has unlimited Stormlight. So it's pretty OP, but you can only hold it open for so long, I guess, because eventually it gets tired and has to recharge before opening it again. Like, he doesn't keep it open for an extended period of time. It's better to just flash it on every now and then to give everyone a refill. But he's doing this so that all the bridgemen who are now Windrunners can fight off the fused Heavenly Ones, and they're all having duels in the sky now. And Kaladin was dueling with Leshwi, and they decide to just part ways and end it as a draw for some reason, because Leshwi's a bit weird. Already sort of mentioned that. And then the pursuer comes back after Kaladin again, and leads him inside the manor at Hearthstone. He says, fight me inside where you can't fly away. So Kaladin just walks inside, and then he immediately loses access to his Surge Binded abilities. The Fused and some singers have set up this suppression Fabrial that uses a Void Light to suppress the powers of Radiance in a nearby area. So Kaladin gets caught short and has to take on the Pursuer, who has these weird lightning abilities, and like 4 singers at the same time. And he manages to do it somehow, even without his powers, which is awesome. Of course, this means he kills the Pursuer, and then that guy is after him for the rest of the book. Presumably the rest of the books? I don't know. I don't know how that's gonna work out. This guy's never gonna stop, right? Anyway, Kaladin manages to deal with them for now. And it turns out that Moash was actually the one who brought the suppression Fabrial, I think. He kills the guy who used to run Kaladin's town and turns it up, and Kaladin's about to run him through but then doesn't, and Marsh is like, you can kill me if you want. And Kaladin can't bring himself to do it because he thinks that there's still some hope for Moash, I guess. But the guy is literally stood in front of him telling him to kill himself. You couldn't get any more despicable. Moash has given up his name as well. He goes by Via now, which is something that that Odium called him, I think, when they gave him the Honor Blade. And like, his emotions seem to have completely gone, being taken away by Odium. He doesn't feel anything anymore. If you've ever seen The Magicians, it's like Martin Chatwin, who has his shade taken away and can't, like, he just doesn't feel guilt for anything he does anymore. He just sees in numbers, essentially. That's kind of what Moash is like. But they're not really fighting, and Renarin comes in and starts exploding with light, because apparently that's how his light weaving works. There's still a load of mystery around Renarin, and we haven't really seen anything of him other than that in this book, so I don't know what's going on with him. I feel like Renarin is a character that could have so much depth to him, but he just keeps being in the back of scenes. Like, he's not having a chance to have any development. We keep getting hints that he has depth to him, and there's loads to explore, but Brandon never explores it. I don't know, maybe he will in part 2. I'm kind of not holding my breath at this point for Renarin POVs, but I don't get why he's overshadowed so much by other characters when what he's doing is probably really interesting. Regardless, this whole engagement sort of wraps up, and the airship starts flying the people of Hearthstone back to Uruthuru to live there in their new home. It's at this point that Dalinar and Kaladin have a conversation on the ship where Dalinar thinks that Kaladin's freezing up again after he didn't go for Moash, and he dismisses him from duty, essentially. Says, look, you don't have to do this anymore. Soldiers suffer from battle shock. I know you have before. I know it's hitting you again now. If you feel like you can come back eventually, that's cool. But basically, you're fired. Apparently, you can do that. And it is the right thing to do, because Kaladin's suffering. He's having a major depressive streak, and he's really lonely. So it is both the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. It's right that he's taken out of combat, but at the same time, it separates him more from the bridgemen and the people around him that he has any sort of connection to, and makes him feel more lonely. So it's kind of like stabbing yourself to get a cake. That was a weird analogy. But yeah, Kaladin gets dismissed and goes back to eventually working as a surgeon again with his father, because he's been real lonely and depressed, like I mentioned. Syl's worried about him, Adeline's worried about him, and I have to give a shout out to Adeline for being a good friend here and looking out for Kaladin and making sure to check up on him and be there and just force him not to be on his own when he's in a dangerous mind state. Shout out Adeline. Making sure he doesn't drink as well. Shout out Adeline. You're doing well, bro. I like you at the minute. You, the MVP of this book so far. Eventually, Kaladin realizes that the only way he can heal people, or the only way he is healing people, is as a surgeon, and he should be able to help the people that have mental illness too. So he goes on the sort of journey to try and find this uncle of someone, a refugee who'd lost him and wanted to find out where he is. And this guy's basically just locked up in a room, because that's what the Ardents do to people with mental illness. They go, oh, he's crazy, we'll lock him in a dark room, that'll make things better. Kaladin, of course, doesn't agree with this. He takes them out into the light and starts essentially creating a support group for them to talk to each other about their problems and try and wake themselves up from the gloominess that's overtaken them. And this is a not major part of like the plot or the story of the book, but I really appreciate the inclusion of it, and I hope it sort of goes somewhere and helps Kaladin as he realizes that this is his family now. The people who are broken but can be mended, or not even can be mended, just that they can help each other cope with being broken, and that being broken is okay. But yeah, Kaladin's doing surgery, and he's got the support thing going on, and Teft kind of retires with him. He's like, fuck this, I'm out too. I'm too old for this shit. I have troubles with Moss. I just want to stay with you. And Cal's kind of mad at him, but then at the same time, he's really thankful to him because he has nobody else. Relaine/Shen has been trying to farm, and there's been this problem all along of them not being able to farm Urithuru because of the weather conditions there being too cold or whatever. And Relaine reveals that the same thing is true for the Parshendi on the Shattered Plains, but what the listeners did was use the light from gems to grow crops. They found that if there was no natural sunlight to grow the crops, they could do it by gem light, and it worked really well. So he's starting to like set that whole farming system up in Urithuru by using Stormlight to grow the plants instead. So that's cool, that's a cool development. But at the end of the book, after the invasion happens, he ends up saying he's going to have to go undercover for the enemy. So I guess the Stormlight growth is on hold for now, at least. The Coalition with Dalinar are trying to figure out where to devote their resources and where the next big attack from Odium might come from. And Dalinar is, like, focused on trying to retake Kholinar and Elefkar because he's an exile from his own home. But the Mink manages to convince him that that's not actually the right call. Lots of the people are exiles from their own home at the minute, and they're just as important. They should focus their resources on where they're less likely to be betrayed by Taravangian, because nobody trusts him at all. And if he makes a push into Elefkar, then that will mean that the Veden forces that Taravangian's under control of can just roll over them after they're already weakened or beat down by the fight with the Fused and the Singers. So it's the Mink from Herdaz that eventually convinces Dalinar to turn his forces to Azir instead, because they assume that Taravangian will just disagree with it, because if he went there, then he'd be giving up his own life. But Taravangian has already come to terms with the fact that he is on a clock and gonna die soon. And he doesn't care. He's still gonna go, and he supports it and agrees with it, which surprises everyone. So everybody in the Coalition is in agreement to go to Azir and fight there and try to push the Singer and Fused forces against Tezim, the Herald, corrupted Herald's forces. And they're trying to go win the fight on that front. So the majority of their troops, Shard Bearers, Radiants, and all the command staff basically, Dalinar, Yasna, all their armies, go to Azir to start the war front there. Which is setting it up for the back half of this book, covering the war in Azir, and they might not even know what's happening at Uruthuru during that war with Azir. It does end with Taravangian betraying everyone and calling his armies to turn on the Alethi, but at the end he decides that he's finally realised he's wrong. Good timing, bro. Good timing, bro. So he's going to try and turn on Odium somehow, even though he'll be executed soon enough, I imagine. Kind of confused what his end goal is at this point. I guess he doesn't have one. Both the Ghostbloods and the Diagram have proven themselves... Actually, the Diagram have proven themselves to be a lot less smart than I thought they were initially. The Ghostbloods have proven themselves to be a bit more smart than I thought they were originally, but I'm still skeptical of how much power and influence they actually have. So unfortunately for the Coalition, that kind of means the majority of their forces are out of Uruthuru. And we learn from Venli's point of view that the forces of Odium are planning to attack Uruthuru, because this fused lady called Raboniel, who everyone seems to respect / fear, and has like this... She's basically the Cadswain of the Singers, if you're a Wheel of Time fan. Cadswain of the Fused, I guess, even. And she has a plan to corrupt the spire at Uruthuru, the crystal pillar that they still haven't figured out how to use, in order to create basically a giant suppression field on the Radiants at Uruthuru so they can just take the city. And that's their plan. The Council of the Nine that I already mentioned, that are frozen into rock thrones essentially, agree with this. And the Pursuer turns up. This is when we find out about him. He turns up and demands to be able to kill Kaladin, which for some reason Leshwi doesn't want to happen. And Venli is now Leshwi's voice, which I wonder where he got that from. Sean-chan, wink, wink, wink. She has to speak for Leshwi, so, like, there's this weird argument going on between them, and it's all just sort of posturing for nothing. But it ends up being that Raboniel gets to take a team to attack Uruthuru, and the Pursuer is going with them, so he's probably going to get his chance to kill Kaladin again. And with her time there, Venli is kind of wanting to get out of the rule of the Fused. She just wants the Singers to be able to go and do their own thing and live in peace, find somewhere where no one's going to bother them and sit and wait the whole thing out. That's obviously not really an option, but she's trying to gather a team to do it anyway, and I half wonder if her and Relaine are going to have a storyline in the second half of this, where they meet each other, find out. They both think they're the last listener people, but when they meet, if they meet, they'll surely discover they're not. There are other listeners still, or at least one other listener still. Maybe we'll get a romance there, who knows. But the important part is, it's bad timing, because all the armies and Radiants and Shards have just left Uruthuru, and now this Singers and the Fused and Stormforms are coming to attack. Navani's left behind at Uruthuru though. She has been doing lots of new experiments with Fabrials, coming up with the airships and different technologies and getting people to research things. She's been questioning Seth, the Assassin in White, to try and figure out some stuff about Fabrials or the Heralds, or what Taravangian's plans might be. And she's also been getting people to research Voidlight through a Voidlight sphere that they took off one of the Fused. And at the end it blows up, but there's a lot of confusing stuff that doesn't really get explained in this half of the book. I don't know if it will be or if it's just stuff that will get glossed over, but a lot of it's not really making sense yet, it's just happening. Regardless, there's been a mysterious Spanreed ruby placed in her room that tells her to stop experimenting with Spren and capturing them in Fabrials and shit. And it turns out that this is the sibling, the Spren, of the Tower of Uruthuru, though we don't learn this for quite a bit until the invasion from the Singers starts properly happening. But she's looking into the suppressor that was brought to them during the fight at Hearthstone, and trying to figure out how it works and if she can reverse it to take the void light powers away rather than the stormlight powers, and she makes the connection between the crystal pillar in Uruthuru and the suppressor. There's a similar shape of crystals in the pillar, so she thinks that that might be part of its function to stop invading Fused. However, not able to figure it out before the invading Fused do actually turn up. So the invasion starts with these Fused, a new type of Fused, or maybe not a new type of Fused, but one that we haven't really seen in depth yet, called the Deepest Ones, and they can combine their axii, which I think are just atoms, with the Earth, and almost like melt into it, and they can go like underground or through walls or whatever. They're essentially these harassing units that will just drop out of the ceiling and strangle you, or pull an arm will come up out of the ground and trip someone over while they're in combat with someone else. They're pretty cool ability-wise, and I'd like to see if there's a parallel for that in the Radiants. That might be what the Stone Wardens can do. I haven't really seen much of their abilities yet, so I don't know what the Stone Wardens are capable of. But I quite like the Deepest One's abilities. They're quite cool. And the way that they fight is interesting because it's different, you know? These sort of harassing hands coming, or legs to trip you over, or flick your ear when you're about to engage someone. And there's tons of Stormform Regals as well, and other Fused Heavenly Ones are attacking. They basically start a full-on invasion by going up through the tunnels, through the mountainside to Uruthuru's base, where the Crystal Pillar is, and Raboniel begins to corrupt the pillar, and all of the Radiants pass out, other than Kaladin, because he is the highest oath, I think. So there were some Radiants left behind. There were Edge Dancers and there were some Windrunners, but not that many. Just basically like a small contingent of each to keep the tower running however they need to. But they've all passed out. And Kaladin's the only one that's awake, but he's lost access to the vast majority of his powers. He can adhere stuff, but he can't change gravity. So adhesion works, but gravity doesn't, which is weird. It's something to do with which powers come more from honor, and I think that's why the Stormlight healing still works as well. But as soon as the craziness starts happening, Navani manages to get in contact with the sibling by putting her hand on one of the strata lines of gems that are all over the walls that have been mentioned in Urufuru a whole bunch of times. And she communicates with the sibling, who is a spren that's been contacting her through the span reads, telling her to stop what she was doing with her Fabrial experiments. And he's very reluctant to allow her to try and help, but with Raboniel's attack basically disabling any chance of the Radiants fighting back and holding the tower, he agrees to show Navani the right way to go, and they organise sort of a fight back against the Fused by distracting them with soldiers for long enough that Navani can go and feed a bunch of Stormlight into this secret hidden room. To get into a secret hidden room, there's like a gem in the wall that they feed Stormlight into. Then in the hidden room there's a Fabrial with this massive gem that like infuses the whole tower. It manages to bring a shield up, which cuts off Raboniel from finishing the process of corrupting the sibling, which is the important part. However, it doesn't reverse anything that happened. The Radiants are still all incapacitated, other than Kaladin, who's barely able to use his abilities. And actually, not all. We find out at the end that Lift is also still up and moving, but she also can't use her abilities, the same as Kaladin. So it turns the higher the oaths, like if they've said the fourth ideal or the third ideal, then they're basically more resistant to this suppression, which is why they don't pass out. But like people who've only said their first or second oath will be much more susceptible to just collapsing when the attack started. And we spend a fair bit of time with Kaladin essentially resisting the fight and trying not to pick up a weapon again, but it's not going well. The Fused and Regals take control of the entire tower, and they're not running around butchering people. If people surrender, they let them, but they're taking control of everything, and eventually the humans have to surrender. Kaladin finds Teft being taken by the fuse. Teft's passed out. He's, like, gone with the rest of the Radiants. And Kaladin decides this is the last straw. They're not taking Teft from him, the one man he has left. And he goes and kills one of the fuse that was trying to take him. And then runs to the 6th floor for some reason. But Lirin basically disowns him and says his son's a monster. And I'm just like, fuck you, Lirin. But yeah, the attack on Urithura is pretty much wrapped up. The invasion worked, and the fused currently have control over it. The humans are now prisoners, essentially, under the rule of Odium. So that's a bit worrying. And one final thing that happened is Lift started chasing a chicken around, and by chicken I just mean bird. And then another bird turned up, and then a poison dart shot past, and Mraize was like, "Mwahaha! I have always wanted to hunt you, little one." Okay, so I'll move on to the other main plotline that happens in this half of Rhythm of War, and that is the expedition to Shadesmar. So, Shallan, for reasons I've already mentioned, has a motive to go to Shadesmar because Mraize wants her to go and find Ristares in the capital city. The Coalition wants somebody to go to Shadesmar, to the capital city, to have an emissary and, like, delegation sent to the Honor-Spren and try and convince them to bond more Radiants. So this becomes a thing. Shallan volunteers for it as, like, the main Radiant, and Adlin goes as the emissary, riding Gallant, his father's Rishadium. They also take an Edge Dancer and a Stone Ward, and a bunch of people from Shallan's team, Fatha and Ishna, who we know a fair bit about already, and then this new character Beryl, who was a prostitute that changed her face to be whoever the men wanted to see. So that's an actually interesting backstory. I hope that she's not evil, because there's a bit here where Shallan thinks she's evil, but hopefully she's not, because I actually like her character. She seems pretty legit and cool. But she invites these three along because they're the most likely suspects of being the spy that's within her team, the Ghostblood spy. So she invites them to try and figure out who the spy is. When they get to Shadesmar, the first part of their journey is on a barge, and they spend about 2 weeks on a barge just sailing. Nothing really happens. Shallan is worrying a lot about a new identity that she is struggling to stop from forming. Weird way of saying it, because the identity is called Formless, but she's trying to stop Formless from forming and struggling. And yeah, I've already talked about how I feel about Shallan. The whole spy plotline is okay, and it sort of follows what you expect it to, the typical plan, and that's because Shallan only knows the typical plan through what she learned from Tyne or Tin in Book 2. So she plans to try and trick them with giving 3 different lies and figuring out which one gets back to Mraize. And that kind of works, and it points her to Beryl, thinking that Beryl is the one informing on her. Because there's a couple of things that let her figure this out. One is the cube, the communication cube that Mraize gave her, has been moved during the first day of the journey. So it's been put down with a different face showing, and she only notices because it's a tiny scratch, and she has that weird uncanny ability to take memories of everything. Actually, I think that's directly related to her light weaving now I think about the memory thing. Because Beryl was talking about not knowing her focus, and I think it's the memories that let her create illusions, not the art itself. Interesting, let's see if that ever gets explored more. Anyway, she figures out that whoever is the spy reporting to Mraize is using the same communication cube that she was given to do that reporting. But after interrogating them all a bit, or not interrogating, but just questioning them slyly, Beryl seems like less and less of a suspect. She's just like an innocent girl who wants to do well. So Shallan and Veil and Radiant begin to doubt that that trick was right. and instead they put some dust on the cube, some powder, so that they'll be able to see that way if it's been disturbed, because they couldn't rely on which face it was showing to be the only thing that told them if it had been used by someone else. And Shallan's trying to catch somebody in the act of doing it, essentially, because it happens a couple more times, but she fails to ever notice anyone, and she has Patton watching over the cube as well, and he doesn't notice anyone. During this time, we get a bit of an introduction to the Edge Dancer and the Stone Ward, and their Spren as well, and Adolin is trying to talk to Maya and sort of train her in a way. He's not trying to train her, but he's trying to teach her things. And she starts learning to copy his katas that he does in the morning, and like practices the forms with him, essentially. Which is kind of cool, and everyone seems impressed by it. All the Spren are like, how did you manage to train your Deadeye? That doesn't happen. And there's some weird stuff going on with Deadeyes here. We find in a little town that they get to that there's a Spren who tells him about a Deadeye that only became a Deadeye in the last 10 years. And they're like, well, there's no new Radiants betraying the Roves, but somewhere there must be, because there's new Deadeyes appearing. But yeah, I'm kind of assuming that eventually Adolin will find a way to restore Maya to the Spren she once was, and that this process of healing her will be what turns him into a Radiant, because it's like so heavily pointing in that direction. And I don't think Adolin needs to be a Radiant to still be a valuable character, but his father seems to think that he should be a Radiant, and he seems to think that he's not viable if he's not a Radiant. So if he can't come to terms with the fact that he is, then I'd like him to become one, because I don't want to see him upset. I actually really like Adolin, he is best boy. Regardless, after they've left the barge, they're journeying on foot the rest of the way to the Honor Spren capital, and they encounter the captain of the ship that they rode with last time, Captain Aiko, and he tells them that he's been exiled for letting Sylphrena go, because he had Sylphrena captive during the last book, but he let her go to escape the Fused, and he's been punished with an eternal exile for that, basically. So, but he has to just walk around the area, around the city or something. He has to do constant laps back and forth. It's really weird, but he's basically just like around and keeps telling Adolin that he's stupid and that the Spren are not gonna listen to him, and he should go home now because they'll just get turned away, or worse. They have a bunch of letters that they're planning to deliver to the Honor Spren, which end up getting torn up, and yeah, I kind of saw that coming. I wasn't expecting anything else to happen. We get told over and over again the Honor Spren aren't gonna listen to you, and then they turn up at the end of the book and surprise, the Honor Spren don't listen to them. There's also another group of humans who refuse to talk to them. I think it's the Tukari. They refuse to talk to them, but they start trailing them on their way to the Honor Capital. I keep saying Honor Capital because I can't remember the name of the city and I can't remember to look it up right now. And they think these guys are following them, like chasing them, because they stay behind, but they're never getting too far away and they refuse all communications. Turns out they were actually hunting Aiko, the Honor Spren, because you can't kill a Spren, but you can cause them enough pain that they wish to stop existing, essentially, and become asleep. For Spren, there's like not much of a line between dead and asleep. It's like the same thing for them, from what I can gather. So these Tukari are hunting down the Honor Spren, by the looks of things. And Adolin realizes at the last moment, because the Tukari turn aside from chasing them down when Aiko turns aside. So he goes to rescue him, which is awesome. And Adolin butchers these men who were more like a mob chasing down and frightened Spren than an actual contingent of soldiers. And he butchers them. He just wipes the fuck out of all of them before anyone else can get there. He takes some damage from it, but I'm sure he'll be fine. Doesn't seem to be anything life-threatening. This leads them away from the camp, though, and Patton is left to guard everyone's belongings while everyone else rides off to try and help Adeline. They do manage to save Aiko, and he agrees to go with them, even though he says it'll be worse for you if I go with you, because they consider me a traitor, and that'll just make us look more complicit. But they take him anyway because they don't trust him to be able to look after himself at this point in the state he's in. And when they get back, Shallan realises the cube's been moved again. It's been set back with the right face on it this time, but the dust has been disturbed, and Patton was the only one there? And she remembers that the lie that she'd fed to Beryl that was what pointed in her direction, because Maria's got told it. Patton overheard that, and then she realises she didn't tell him about the powder, but she did tell him about the face being set right. So that's another thing. So Shallan asks him a question and tricks him into lying to her about their past. And he does, and then she realises that Patton's lying. So, like, I think Patton's the spy? That's what she thinks, at least. Up until that point, my theory was that Formless is the spy, and that this alter ego that she's suppressing is coming out and she's blacking out for that period and reporting on herself to Maria's. I don't know if that could somehow be linked with Patton as well, but everything's pointing at Patton now rather than Formless. Kind of interested to see where that goes in the next half. Oh, and I forgot to mention, during the fight with Adeline, Maya actually joins in. Like, she stands back to back with him and protects him as he's looking to face down 20 men. And then they start doing the kata together and just killing everyone. So that's awesome that Maya fights with him, because you can really feel the bond between these two starting to develop like a Radiant bond would. They trust each other and they look after each other and they learn from each other. And yeah, Maya and Adeline are a good pair. But yeah, when they eventually get to the city, they try giving the letters get ripped up. The Honest Bren are like, fuck you guys. And Adeline says, look, I haven't done anything wrong. I have never killed a Spren. If you want to call me guilty and call me a murderer, I resent that. I refute that. Put me on trial. Prove to me why you shouldn't at least listen to what I'm saying. So they arrest him. And that's pretty much where we leave off. So, I've been enjoying this so far, and it probably will come out as its own video, and then later I'll release part 2, because I've been going for about an hour, though with editing it'll be shorter. But yeah, I've been enjoying this first half of Rhythm of War so far. I've absolutely torn through it in like a few days. It's been real quick. It took me like 5 days. So maybe not that quick, but it seems like a fast pace. Don't enjoy it quite as much as Oathbringer, but that's because of the personal emotional attachment I had to the scenarios that the characters in Oathbringer were suffering from. So I do really like this book. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the second half. There's a lot of action so far, and there's still a lot of threads that need to be tied up. And the second half looks pretty chunky, so I will see you for that whenever it comes out. With all that being said, I'm going to wrap up this video for today, and if you enjoyed my discussion of part 1 of Rhythm of War, please leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought. If there's anything you want to clear up that isn't a spoiler, then feel free. Please don't spoil anything in the comments, obviously. Not that there's much left of the series to spoil now. Also, leave a like on the video. You know you wanna. I'm not gonna say smash that like, because that's what fucking everyone says. Why is it smash? Why smash? I don't get it. Hit the like button. Tap that like button. Tap it.